What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Is Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte the best 1-2 punch in baseball? Is this the best bullpen that we've seen from the Dbacks all decade? And what to do with Ryne Nelson?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Well, I want a power rank. I've been thinking about this all day. Where does Corbin Carroll, Ketel Marte, the Dbacks 1-2 punch in their lineup, where does it rank among all duos in the National League? Is this the best bullpen since I've taken over the podcast? I came on in 2020. We'll discuss that. And then Ryne Nelson struggled in his start to the Kansas City Royals. We'll discuss what to do with Ryne Nelson in segment number 3 to wrap up today's podcast. So a lot to talk to you guys about today. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the podcast and let's discuss where you would rank Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte. I don't know why I started thinking about this. Maybe it's because it's peak basketball season. Sorry, guys who are Suns fans. I'm a Lakers fan. So watching LeBron and Luka every night, I'm like, this is a fantastic duo. Lakers are probably going to go as far as LeBron and Luka as long as they stay healthy and keep playing at this high level. Like when you look at the NBA right now, it feels like it's all about duos, right? That's what he said about the Suns, KD and Booker, and then you got the Lakers with Luka and LeBron now, and you go across basketball, Dame and Giannis, right? And so bringing this now back to baseball, I was thinking about Corbin Carroll, Ketel Marte. That's your 1-2 punch at the top of your lineup. Whether it's a righty or a lefty on the mound, you're going to get some combination of those two guys at the top. And of course, we've seen Corbin Carroll, Rookie of the Year, finished top 5 in MVP voting in 2023. Last year, Ketel Marte finished as an MVP finalist. So those are two legitimate studs. Each guy, you would not be surprised if they won an MVP as long as Shohei Ohtani's not playing in the National League, right? So I kind of wanted to ask, where you would rank the Dbacks 1-2 punch in the National League. I actually did a quick power ranking of the top 10 duos in the NL. I didn't do the bottom 5 teams, the Rockies, the Cardinals, the Nationals, the Pirates, and the Marlins, because I don't think they have two guys worth cracking the top 10. But the Dbacks are definitely within the top 10 of this list when you have two MVP guys. So where would you actually rank the Dbacks among all National League teams? We're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top, because at number 10 for me is the San Francisco Giants duo of Matt Chapman, Willy Adames. I really like both of these guys. Willie has been one of the best power hitting shortstop over the last few years. Chapman's consistently between 25 and 30 bombs. I just think when you go through the rest of the duos on this list, they're just there's more upside. And I think they're just more dynamicism. That's not a word, right? They're just more dynamic players. I always want dynamicism. I don't even know how you would say it, but they're just more dynamic players on this list. Chapman and Adames, it's not like they're the most athletic guys. It's not like they're unathletic, but they're not exactly burners on the bases. And I just think when you look at the ceiling of some of the players ahead of them on this list, they're just better guys. Chapman and Willie are two all-star level guys, but everyone else on this list has at least one guy that could probably win an MVP. And I think the Giants are the only team who don't have one guy in their lineup that you could realistically talk into winning an MVP this upcoming season. Because at number 9, I have the Cincinnati Reds duo of Matt McLain and Ella De La Cruz. And of course, we all know Ella De La Cruz coming off a season where he finished 8th in MVP voting, 25 home runs, 67 stolen bases, probably the most fun player in the National League going right now. But the forgotten man, Matt McLain, I threw him as the number 2 guy in this because he missed all of 2024. But if you go back to his 23 season, he was a 290 guy, 864 OPS, 16 home runs, 14 steals, and only played 89 games. He was on his way to having a monster rookie campaign. I think the fact they missed all of 2024 has made us forget how good he was. Now, he needs to get back to that level. I'm betting on upside here at number 9 with the Reds, but I think Ella De La Cruz is a legitimate MVP candidate. And then you got Matt McLain, who looked like an all-star level plus player in 2023 as a rookie. I like them at 9. At number 8, I put Christian Yelich and Jackson Chirios. Yelich is coming off a bounce-back season where he looked really good last year, but is it replicable? I don't know. He did miss the rest of the season, only played 73 games last season due to injury. And so how healthy will he be in 2025? That's a big conversation. He did bounce back in 23, then looked even better in 2024. Now the question is, will the injury set him back? But Jackson Chirios is a guy that people love as like a dark horse MVP, or at least a guy that could, finish top 5 in MVP voting after coming off a really strong rookie season. Again, he just turned 21 years of age. So part of this is like the upside when it comes to Jackson Chirios. So I'm fine with Yelich and Chirios at number 8. At number 7 for me, I got Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki. Tucker is legitimately one of the best players in baseball, 30-30 guy every single season, 100 RBIs. Then Seiya, I think, is underrated as a guy who has some real pop, can hit for average, even steal a few bags for you. I think that's a very underrated duo, and Kyle Tucker is one of the best players in the sport. Number 6, Fernando Tatis and Jackson Merrill. I debated putting Manny Machado here, but I think Merrill's on the upward trajectory and Machado might be on the downward trajectory. And then Tatis, outside of Ohtani, you can make the argument Tatis is the best player in the National League when he's right. The question is, when will he be right? Because health has been a problem for him, and he hasn't exactly been that superstar Tatis that we saw pre-PEDs, but I still love him. I still think he's a stud. So I'll put Jackson Tatis at number 6. Number 5, I think this goes to the Philly boys, Bryce Harper and Trey Turner. The reason I have them at number 5, they're both still all-star level studs, but I think at this point in their career, they're starting to plateau. They're not in the decline, but I don't think they're getting better. You can still talk me into a Bryce Harper MVP, a Trey Turner, all-star campaign, but I would have them behind my number 4 duo of the Dbacks, Ketel Marte, Corbin Carroll. I think this is the right place to put the Dbacks. Marte, 3rd in MVP voting last year. Carroll, top 5 the year prior. Yes, Carroll's coming off a down season, but even with that being said, his numbers are still right there with Trey Turner, if not better than Trey Turner's by the end of the season. And so I think Marte being the best second baseman in the sport, plus having one of the 5 most dynamic players in Corbin Carroll, who I think is going to have a monster power season in 2025, they are my number 4 duo. Number 3, I think, is going to be Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor. You can make an argument that they should be higher. I think other people would put them higher. I think personally, I have a blind spot for Lindor. I think he's a stud, but do I think he should have been behind Ketel Marte in MVP voting last season? I do. But you added Juan Soto, who was 2nd MVP voting in the AL. You got the 2nd in NL MVP voting from last season in Lindor. Like, that is the number 3 duo, in my opinion, because number 2, I'm going to put Ronald Acuna, who is, yes, coming off a major injury, torn ACL, but he was the best player in the National League before he got hurt, when he had a 70-plus home run season, 40 home runs. Like, it was a monster year for Acuna. And then Matt Olson having 50 home runs a couple years ago as well. Like, the best version of Acuna and Olson might be the scariest duo in Major League Baseball. The only duo that you would have ahead of them is probably Ohtani and Betts, because, again, Ohtani by himself, is a duo. He's a pitcher and a hitter. So he's already a duo. And then Mookie Betts, one of the biggest culture changers, franchise leaders that you want on your roster, went over there and changed the culture of LA, made them into a winner. And so when looking at the best duos in the National League, I think I go Ohtani Betts number 1, Olsen Acuna 2, Soto Lindor number 3. But then I think it's our D-back guys at number 4, with potential for real upside. Like they could be better than Olsen Acuna coming off down seasons. That is definitely a combination of Marte and Carroll that could crack that top 3 if we see a full season of power from Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte continues to establish himself as the best second baseman in the sport. Don't be surprised if Marte and Carroll finish the season as arguably the best duo in the National League. Now we'll discuss if this has been the best D-backs bullpen this decade in segment number 2. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called all-in pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss if this is the best D-backs bullpen of the roaring 20s, because I took over the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast in 2020, and it was down bad for Arizona when you go back and look at those bullpen numbers during that COVID-shortened season, because D-backs arguably had the worst bullpen during 2020, and like those next couple of years, like they were terrible, specifically at like closing games. Like they were probably the worst in Major League Baseball, definitely in the National League when it comes to closing games, and go back and look at their numbers back in 2020, 2021. Like that was their biggest issue. We always discuss who is going to be the D-backs closer, because if you even think about 2022 when they won 74 games, we were saying like the D-backs like had a decent closer. They might have won like, they might have went 500, and who knows, maybe like snuck into a wild card. But the bullpen has been so bad from 2020 to about 2023, right before the World Series, that it really took this team back, especially when you saw versions of this franchise where the lineup, the offense was really good. Even the rotation would be good at times, but then through 7 innings, you would try to close it out with your bullpen, and they just gave up games. Because if you remember, let's actually go through the time machine, take us back to 2020, and look how far the D-backs have come. Because right now, we know the D-backs have a bullpen full of flamethrowers with the Martinezes and the Pucks, right? The Ginkles. Like, there's so many guys right now. D-backs might have 5-6 guys that could throw between like 96 and 102 in their bullpen entering 2025. And if you go back and look at the bullpen in 2020, not many guys that could do that. Archie Bradley was a closer. He could throw pretty hard, but Stephon Crichton, Junior Guerrera, Alex Young, Alex Young and Taylor Clark were second and third. Not even second and third. I take that back. Alex Young and Taylor Clark, and they also made some starts, which is also the reason. But in terms of the guys who were in the normal rotation, they were second and third on this D-backs team in terms of innings pitched. Like, that's how bad it was. We needed them out the bullpen. Remember, Hector Rondon gave us 20 innings pitched in the 2020 COVID shortened season. Like, terrible. You go to 2021 and look at who was closing games for the D-backs. Remember, we tried to reinvent ourselves in 2021. Said 2020 COVID shortened year. We're going to be better. Mad Bum's going to be better. We went out there. We signed Joakim Soria to be our closer. We even added guys like Tyler Clippard to be the setup man, right? What happened? Atrocious. More atrocious bullpen work. Soria was terrible. He had to be traded at the deadline. You know who ended up finishing second on this team in innings pitched? Well, number one was Caleb Smith, who was not good at all. A terrible walk rate, gave up a ton of hard contact. You know who was second on this D-backs team in terms of innings pitch? Matt Peacock. Do you remember Matt Peacock? He was this guy who had an incredible story, and then he came up to the majors, and he didn't really do a lot for the D-backs, but he was at least a fun time. Caleb Smith, I forgot, was one of the worst pitchers in terms of home runs allowed. Like, that's what the D-backs are doing in 2021. Matt Peacock, Caleb Smith. Look at 2022. We win 74 games, but again, it's the bullpen that holds us back because we signed Mark Melancon coming off the All-Star campaign with the San Diego Padres. We think he's the savior to the franchise, but sadly, he's not. Still got Caleb Smith out there who, again, leads the D-backs bullpen in innings pitch. Like, that should have been the telltale sign. 2 straight years where Caleb Smith is your go-to reliever out the pen. That is a big-time issue. Mansupply did make the All-Star team this year, which was great to see, but do you also remember Ian Kennedy trying to be the closer for the D-backs? He finished 21 games for the D-backs in 2021. He was also really, really bad. Now we get to 2023, and this is when we're starting to see some hope, starting to see some signs of life. We traded for Paul Sewald at the deadline, and at the time, that was very helpful. Kevin Ginkel came on in a big way as well down the stretch. All of a sudden, we found Ryne Thompson. All of a sudden, Andrew Saalfrank came into the mix, and it's like, okay, still got Mansupply. Okay, we got a bullpen that's all of a sudden good enough to take us to the World Series. Now you go to 2024, and yes, 2024, the rotation really held us back, but the bullpen in a whole wasn't too bad. Sewald was really bad, but we got a breakout season from J Mart. Ginkel, Thompson, Mansupply, another good year. Jarvis showed us a lot as well. Yober Diaz had moments, so it's like maybe the closer role fell apart in the first half of the year, but by the second half of the year, we had Puck in the building as a setup man. We had J-Mar as the closer. Ginkel and Ryne Thompson had established roles. Mansupply was a go-to lefty. Like, we at least had an identity from the bullpen by the second half of 2024. And now entering 2025, I think this is undeniably the best bullpen that the D-backs have put together this decade. You look at J-Mar as the closer, the most electric guy the D-backs maybe have ever had at the closer position, the filthiest stuff, mixed with maybe the best setup man that they've ever had in AJ Puck, who is 98, 99. Martinez is like 102, 103. Got Ginkel who's throwing 97, 98 behind them. Ryne Thompson is a ground ball machine. Joe Mansupply, a lefty specialist. Kendall Graveman, a guy who's been in a bunch of high leverage moments, a guy who's closed out games. Then some wild cards in a Dre Jameson who could throw 100 miles per hour. Bryce Jarvis, who was huge for the D-backs in 2024 and can also throw 95, 96, 97. Like, this D-backs bullpen, for the first time, I think we're going to go into a season where I actually like everyone in the pen. There's always a Castro or a Scott McGuff. There's always at least 1 or 2 relievers where I'm like, oh my God, as soon as they come in the game, I know we're going to give up earned runs. But for the first time since I've taken over this podcast, I think I'm a fan of every member in the D-backs bullpen. I don't think that's ever happened before. And because of that, I think this will be the best D-backs bullpen of the Roaring 20s. Now we'll discuss what to do with Ryne Nelson in segment number 3. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of 200,000 parts from 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SHF for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And also, I want to talk to you guys about Just Ingredients, because when it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients has also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. I love that Just Ingredients prioritizes wholesome, nourishing ingredients without the artificial junk. Just visit justingredients.us/Bryce Harper and use code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off your first order. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients on Instagram. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's wrap up the podcast by discussing what to do with Ryne Nelson. But before we get into the podcast, or at least the segment, I first want to say, because I forgot to do at the top of the podcast, please send in your questions. I'm doing Mailbag Fridays every Friday for the regular season. So please send your questions to me by Thursday night, because I record my podcast on Thursday to be released Friday. So if you want your questions heading into the weekend, please drop them in the YouTube comment section. Reach out to me on Twitter at CareerThomas24, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram. And please send me your questions. And the other thing is, if you check the YouTube comment section the last couple of days, we got a user, let me make sure I get his username right, by the name of FrogFan1346. He has started a Locked on Diamondbacks Dynasty League. I will be joining. If you want to join and play with me and other Locked on Dbacks listeners, go check the YouTube comment section of the last few videos. His username, again, FrogFan1346. Thank you, Frog Fan, for starting the fantasy league. So if you want to join and be part of a Locked on D-backs listener and host only league, please go join in the YouTube comments section. Yeah, go look for his profile. But now let's talk about Ryne Nelson and what to do with him, because Ryne Nelson, after his most recent outing against the Kansas City Royals, he's probably out of the rotation. I mean, we discussed the other day about how the rotation feels pretty set. Of course, Burns, Gallen, Kelly, locked in top three. Erod with the contract, and he's looked pretty damn good this spring training. He's probably going to get that number 4 spot. Then Brandon Pfaadt, the man who's the number 3 starter in the World Series rotation, who was really good last season, at least in the first half. Yeah, he's going to get that number 5 spot. There was still a chance with Ryne Nelson, but he was absolutely crushed by Kansas City in their game yesterday. And so he looks like he's probably out the rotation. And so with that being the case, what should the D-backs do with Ryne Nelson? Because I think there's 3 realistic options. The first 2 are the most realistic, and then there's a third one. Option number 1 is you send him to the minors, you let him start, and you just wait for injury to the rotation on the major league level, because Ryne Nelson is still someone that you want to give as many reps and opportunities to as a starter. This is a guy who earned a starting rotation spot after the season he had last year. And if the D-backs didn't have 6 legitimate starters, he would be in this D-backs rotation. He's earned a spot, but we just have too many guys right now. And so to continue his development as a starting pitcher and to make sure he's improving off what he did last year, getting better, send him down to the minors, send him to AAA Reno, where we know it's a very hitter-friendly ballpark, and let's see what he could do down there. Because I think that's probably the best place for him to go right now. We know he wants to be in the rotation, but just too much of a logjam right now, Ryne Nelson. Just go down there. Last season, we saw how quickly injuries can just really ravage a situation. Hopefully it's not like that in 2025, but if it is, knowing we have Ryne Nelson ready and waiting in the wings, he should be the first man up if anything happens to a rotation member. Ryne Nelson, just stay ready in Reno. Option number 2 is to put him in the bullpen. This is what I have been saying a lot on podcasts. I would not be mad at all because I think the final bullpen spot is probably going to come down to, or the final 2 bullpen spots, I think is going to come down to like Drey Jameson, Bryce Jarvis, like a Kyle Nelson, maybe a Shelby Miller. But I think Ryne Nelson should get one of the bullpen spots. He should be the D-backs long reliever. Well, the other issue is Jordan Montgomery is probably going to get one of those bullpen spots if he's not traded. So that actually just leaves one bullpen spot. And I think if Monty's off the roster, Ryne Nelson should be the long reliever. It probably makes more sense for Nelson to go to the rotation if Monty's in the bullpen. Makes more sense for Nelson to go to the minors if Monty's in the bullpen. Just because you don't need 2 long reliever types, give Ryne Nelson more starting, opportunities. But if Monty gets traded before the regular season starts, I would not mind Ryne Nelson at all as the long reliever, and then Drey Jameson as that extra high leverage back end arm. But I think when looking at option 2 of sending him to the bullpen, I think if Monty's in the bullpen, Ryne Nelson going to the minors, then I think it's between Bryce Jarvis and Drey Jameson for the last spot. And even if the D-backs traded Monty before the regular season starts, I still believe the D-backs should probably send Nelson to Reno, let him start in the rotation, and then choose both Drey Jameson and Bryce Jarvis to be in the D-backs bullpen, potentially. But I still think Ryne Nelson wouldn't get the nod as the long reliever. I really think the D-backs want Ryne Nelson to be the starter in Reno for this rotation in 2025. But there is still one more option. Third option is you could dangle him as a trade chip. You could trade him before the regular season starts if you really want to. Now, do I think the D-backs would do that? No, I think if the D-backs were to dangle him as a trade chip, I think it would be near the deadline. If there was like a significant hole on the roster and then another team was willing to fill it for Ryne Nelson, I could see the D-backs pulling that kind of move off. But even with that being said, I think at the end of the day, the D-backs are going to hold on to Ryne Nelson through this season. I think they're going to send him to AAA, send him to Reno, let him start in that rotation, and then just wait for injury, because at the end of the year, Gallen's coming off the books, Merrill Kelly's coming off the books, Jordan Montgomery's coming off the books. The rotation is going to open up for Ryne Nelson if he continues to improve in AAA, if he gets a couple starts on the major league level and shows you he is even better than what he was in 2024. All he has to do is bide his time, and he will get himself a rotation spot. It's hard to even say in 2026. I don't even want to think that far ahead. So Ryne Nelson, just wait your time in Reno for an opportunity and then take advantage of that situation. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.